Welcome to the show. I'm Danella, and here's what's happening now. This week, everyone is watching the hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, hearings to determine whether he will be the next Supreme Court justice. It's been a spectacle, but that's not the only thing that we should have been watching this week. In Political Pop, we'll talk about the situation in North Carolina and how no one's doing anything about it. What's the situation? It's coming up in Political Pop. And in our world this week, going to do something a little bit different. I had something else planned that I wanted to talk to you about, but we're going to get very personal. I'm going to talk about how I got through the most difficult period of my life. And in that, I learned that your mind will set you free. What does that mean? Your mind will set you free. We'll talk about how that lesson really has saved my life. But first, let me give a special hello. I have a new follower. Big hello and thank you to David Morgan 05. Okay, so David, clearly we go back a long time because you brought up me working at BET, which also spawned the rough period of my life. You'll hear about that in our world. But yeah, David, thank you so much for following. And you also referenced me as Honey D. Old school. That means we go back prior to BET. That means we go back when I had blonde hair and tanned quite regularly. So thank you so much. That's a long time. So thank you so much for being so supportive. Thank you for your kind words and thank you for subscribing. All right, now let's kick off Political Pop. Here is your Political Pop for Friday, September 7th. We'll head to North Carolina. So the Supreme Court had ruled that the current gerrymandering congressional map in North Carolina is unfair and favors Republican candidates. Once the Supreme Court determined that the map was unfair, North Carolina had until September 17th to draw up a new map. Well, a federal court this week said, hey, there's not enough time to do it. So the next election, that we're in, the November elections in North Carolina are going to be used with the current map. Again, this is a map that's deemed illegal and deemed to unfairly favor Republican candidates. Keep in mind, if North Carolina did draw out the correct map that represents the state of North Carolina, that definitely would have shifted the balance of power in the House. Well, a federal judge has stopped that, again saying there's just not enough time. I say it is unfair, it is illegal, and that is your Political Pop. Also this week, back to school. Whoa! Back to school already. I swear, as you get older, time really flies by. I remember being young thinking, oh, time is so slow, except summer breaks. They never seem long enough. But as you get older, it's like, man, you look up, time has flown by. So yeah, kids are back to school. I should say students, college students, you're back. Most schools are all back in session. Exciting. Well, not for all. Did you hear about this situation in Detroit? I did not know this, but lead pipes are to blame for the schools shutting down water supply. In fact, they're going to have to bring in bottled water or coolers because they're saying that it's not so much a problem with the water supply, but more old pipes in these school buildings. So it's going to take some time, but they're going to have to go in and replace the pipes. And so when I heard about this and I read this article about this, I then found a connecting article, which I'm ashamed to say I had no idea about, but that just north of me, in my same state, something similar happening. In Baltimore for over a year. I apologize for not knowing this. I had no idea that in Baltimore City public schools, students have been dealing with this, like I said, for a year. Not being able to drink any water out of the school building or wash your hands. I can't imagine how expensive it has to be for the school to also pay for water in that way for the students. But imagine, I saw this picture, I thought, what? I can't imagine what this like is to go into my bathroom, for example, wash my hands and see all these warning signs. And you can't help but feel that no one cares about you. So imagine this is your situation last year and you come back to school this year and it's still like, well, no one has fixed this. And the even bigger question that I think about is how long did this go undetected? I know. Our hope is that it was caught immediately and resolved in the sense of putting up some signs and bringing in water. But it is fearful for me to see how slow a lot of these government institutions work. You know, how long did it take for them to determine that there's lead in these buildings? So definitely keeping an eye out on that. Hopefully, Detroit schools that are affected will not have to wait as long as the folks in Baltimore. And hopefully, the folks in Baltimore, this will end soon and all schools will be able to have safe pipes so that students can have access to clean water. Also, this week, the strongest typhoon to hit Japan in 25 years occurred. At least 10 people dead and at least 470 people injured. Then, the following day, Japan is hit with a 6.7 magnitude earthquake, leaving at least 9 people dead, dozens still missing. And the images are just shocking to see. Unfortunately, they have experienced a lot of natural disasters, but this is a major one. All right, let's jump into In Our World. In Our World this week, here's what we're talking about. It's a lesson that I learned in literally the most difficult period of my life. And that is only your mind can set you free. Sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy. But it's true. Your mind really is the key to your freedom and happiness. I'm going to talk about how I learned that and get a little personal about it. Again, as I said, the most difficult period of my life. So for me, I've always been somebody that was very, very close to my grandmother, as I have said multiple times on this podcast. I say that because she raised me, my mom being so young, and that happens often in families, right? When you have a young mom, the grandmother most times really step in to mother the children. And even if the mom is older, a lot of times the grandmas step in to help the parents. So for me, my grandmother was mom, like, oh, here's some food, you're cut, here's some life lessons, hugs and kisses. She was the first person that taught me just unconditional love. She was the first person to teach me that. And so because of it, I remember being very young and thinking to myself, and I know this sounds crazy, but in my mind, I would think worst case scenarios often. I remember thinking to myself, I never want to be working when my grandmother dies. And I thought this for years. And so the reason this came into play for me is because in my career, radio and television, you can't really take days off of work. You just have to wait till it's your break. They call it when the studio goes dark or it's a holiday. And a lot of times when you're up and coming in radio, your holiday, when you're up and coming, that's when you work. So you never miss working holidays. So because for me, I couldn't really take off work. Again, I was, grinding to be on, putting everything on hold to just make it, really establish myself in this career, that it always struck my mind. Like, what if I had a personal tragedy? And at that point, it would be my grandmother. So that's why it became like this statement that I thought of in every job for years. Not that she was dying or sick, but it was my worst case scenario. And I would think oh man, I never want to have to be on air. Like, what if you get the call and you're on air and they're like, hey, I'm so sorry, your grandmother passed. And then you have to pretend to still be present for your viewers or listeners. So for me, that was like, I don't know, too not only just emotional, but also honest to pretend that that didn't happen. Right. So I think about that when you watch the news as well. And sometimes people have to report tragedies on people that they know or don't know. And then they have to kind of work through that. So I remember just thinking that. So I'm going to take you back to 2009 because that was the complete year. And it started prior to my grandmother actually being sick and diagnosed. So during that period, when I say that every single thing that was like within a 1 year period of start to finish, everything that I thought was solid and rooted in fact in my life was all destroyed. And I never talk about that. It was all destroyed. And I guess destroyed isn't the right word, but it felt like destruction because on one end, something's there and then it's not there anymore. It was completely gone and broken down. And so we'll start in order. I'll try to start. So everything, when I say everything, we're going to say job, friendships, relationships, and then my grandmother. So I remember it was just like in your mind, you're like, can it get worse? And it did. Because at one period, I ended working with BET. And at that time, I was just out of contract, right? So it was like, so what am I supposed to do? I'm in New York. I'm like, my lease is up in my apartment. I'm like, am I staying? Am I going? What am I going to do? And so I ended up at that point living off of my savings, and you can only live so long off of savings. Like, who's preparing to be not working for like a year? You're supposed to. But yeah, I also was bad with money, lending out money to family members who never returned the money. Yes, another lesson I learned at that time. But it was really hard because I was getting to a point where I really needed support, and everything that I had counted on was no longer there. And so it made me start to feel like, wow, a lot of the relationships that I have were built around what I could supply. Yeah, it was a tough truth for me. And so if I don't have this seeming job, because to me, you're who you are with or without a job. So me not being on BET, for example, at that time, full time or under contract, made me really see that some of the friends that were my friends, those friendships were contingent upon that job. Well, probably, I don't know, man, maybe like 3 months, 4 months or so after I stopped working with BET, I get the call that my grandmother is like really sick. And I remember like my mom's freaking out on the phone. She's like, they're going to test grandma for cancer. And she had these, hate to say it, but visions of this happening. And she's like panicking on the phone. And I remember when I get this call, I'm like running an errand. And at this point, I'm not even in my own apartment. I have just recently broken up with my boyfriend, who at the time we were like in a serious relationship. And I realized it's not that serious. And I'm now subletting apartment. I literally took all of my belongings and put them in a storage. So I'm now living in someone else's like apartment. So who I'm subletting from is this woman who worked on a cruise ship. I never met her, but she basically would tour a lot. So she would sublet her apartment while she's on these cruise ships playing in the orchestra. Nice lady. So anyway, yes, I'm leaving out some of the dramas that got to this point in essence of time. But yes, so I'm in this new neighborhood. I probably have been there, I don't know, maybe less than a month. It was like 3 weeks. And I'm just getting this frantic call from my mother. And she's just like, I just don't want to be here when they tell me what I know. I know they're going to say grandma has cancer. And I remember saying to her, I was like, look, I'm on the streets. So here's what we're going to do. You literally have what, like an hour? We have 1 hour, maybe 10. I don't even know. 10 minutes. I don't know what we have. Because if it probably was like maybe 20 minutes in time. I don't know how that test came back so fast, but it did, because I was still on the street corner. So I'm just, I said, Mom, if we just have 10 minutes of grandma not having cancer, let's just take this 10 minutes and have her not have cancer. And if this happens, if they diagnose her, if we get to this point, then we'll deal with it. But right now, that's not our definite reality. So we may only have 10 minutes or an hour, however long this freaking test take, to have a world where she's not battling that. So let's just ride that out. And so Mom's like, okay. And for me saying this, it was one, I needed to get off the street. Again, I'm like in this part of New York I hadn't lived in. And so I'm like, I just need to get to back to this apartment I'm subletting. It's not even my, natural surroundings, but let me just get off the streets, And it was odd because at that same time, I was literally having a disagreement with at that time, friend of mine who I was ending that friendship. Again, realizing you are not my friend. And also, I have bigger things to worry about than how fake you are as a friend, how much you lied to me as a friend. You're not my real friend. And then I'm having this call look, I just need to deal with whether or not my grandmother has cancer right now. I just want you to know I found out about said lies, and thank you. I get it. We're not really friends. And then the phone beeps. It's my mom again. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even get a time to figure out where I'm going, because in the just craziness of how life was going on, it's like, how did I get here? How the heck am I subletting someone's apartment and all of my stuff is in some storage? How am I walking on a street that I barely even know, trying to get to this said subletted apartment, and I'm lost? I literally need to get off the phone and map directions back. I'm only a couple blocks away, but just completely earth shattering. Again, because it's like, wow, everything that I'm thinking is crumbling down. So I remember my mom called me back and she's like, yeah, they diagnosed grandma. She has cancer. And I remember being like, sorry. It's still emotional for me, that period of my life, only because it was like the worst thing somebody could say, because, sorry, just get it together. Because anyone that has dealt with that, you know that it is a very painful and can be drawn out scenario. And so for me, even the tears that I'm getting now is more of reliving that, not so much of what really happened, but my emotional state of well, what are we going to do? What does this mean? What can I do? What do I have resources to do? Everything how are we going to get through this? Because for us, my grandmother was our glue. Again, her being that matriarch, but she was a good buffer for everyone, And at that period, my relationship with my mom was super broken, had been for years and years and years, and super kind of distant. And so it was how are we now? My sister, my mom, and I going to navigate our family, to get through this. So anyway, at that time, it was just well, forget it. There's nothing keeping me in New York, so let me just return to DC. And I remember even that was difficult for me, because when I left DC, I had at that point left years ago, and I said, I'm not coming back. I was blessed to be able to get the job and work with BET and relocate to New York City. But during that time, emotional for me, I had lost several relatives younger than me. And I had this feeling of, I just don't want to live in here, this area anymore. I don't want to look around and think about my younger relatives who've been murdered, and we're talking crimes unsolved. I just had enough, and I was like, I'm not coming back. So to come back, this literally, her passing would be the only way for me, to actually return. So I come back to DC, and, I'm staying at my grandmother this time. I'm in her house, she's in a senior building. So I'm staying there with my mom while my grandmother's in the hospital. And I am grateful. This is going to sound crazy, but I'm thankful that literally from diagnosis to her passing was 6 weeks. It was very quick, considering for many people, it can be years and years of constant battling chemotherapy and various drugs and all the havoc that it wreaks on the patient and the family members. And so I was grateful that for us, it was just kind of consistently a decline. So it was hard. So during that period, I remember, man, I was depressed. And I remember partly because I didn't really have resources to pay for a lot of stuff. Again, my stuff is in storage in multiple places. I had to bring some stuff to DC, some stuff still in New York in storage. And I'm like, but I need to get a job. I need to be working. And it hits me. This is exactly what I would have wanted, in the sense of saying, for years, I said, I don't want to be working when my grandmother dies. And so I remember at that point, my mom made a deal. She was like, well, look, you can stay here. I'll get us food and things like that. And you just be the primary person with grandma, she was like, for us, it's not only emotional, but we're working. So you just do that. You be the person that goes and be the contact for us. And that's what I did, like every day. Sorry. And I'm grateful to have that opportunity, because it's one where I would have never said that I wanted for myself. I would have never look to the future and necessarily set my world up to be this way to receive it. But I was grateful to the fact that I was with her every day. I was literally there until, until her actual last breath. And it was like the most joy and sadness at the same time. Joy because to be able to be with her, to pray with her, to hold her hand as she transitioned is like, for so many times in my life prior to that, I never had that experience. Death can kind of come so suddenly and you never get to really say goodbye or be there for the person that's there for you. And so even as I'm tearing up now, a lot of it is like gratefulness and joy, And then the sadness is obviously, it's like, man, I gotta live on earth without you. Like literally, I swear death is the hardest for us, staying around and living and surviving. And so one of the things that was happening during this entire period was emotionally, I was like, yo, God, for real? Like, this is like a lot of bad I've lost within this year period. Is this really what's supposed to happen? I've lost a lot of friends, even some family members. I'm like, these are terrible relationships I'm in. I didn't realize this. And I was, it was weird. I'm like, this is the longest I'm not working. I don't understand. I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding. I'm like, I had great ratings. It wasn't that I stopped working and it was bad. In fact, after I left BET full time, that period, I'd worked with them for a couple years after that, just on special shows. But anyway, it was really like, what's going on? And so my older friend said to me, because I was really getting depressed, because here I am also surrounded, like sleeping in my grandmother's bed, right? So on one end is comforting, but another end, every day I'm waking up like, today might be the day she dies. And I got to kick it with the rest of the world without her. Like, I was like, this blows. So I'm grateful, because one of my friends, this is my friend, she's older than I am. And she's amazing. She's a mentor to me. And she had said to me, she said, Danella, you're really at a period of your life of great growth. And I'm like, how could this be positive? And she said, your job will come when you are emotionally ready. And she said, and part of the lesson for you right now is understanding who you are, regardless of what's happening around you. And so when she said it, I was like, but I know who I am. Like, I'm a grown woman in my mind, right? Because you get so defensive. And she was like, but your happiness a lot is depending upon what's happening in your world and others around you. You're not really realizing your true worth and also who you really are. And then I was like, but I really know myself. And she said, and who you really are is regardless, you still have that joy in you, that love in you. You have God in you. So that's the lesson to learn. And I know that it's hard to hear that now when you're in a great loss. You're experiencing a great loss because, obviously if it's 6 weeks, there was like a couple of weeks of like conversation. And then the remainder of that was not. Sorry. So it was hard. It was hard to still show up, and be positive, and still talk and, deal with like doctors and translating whatever they say to relevant family members, all those things and getting things in order, and like seeing the body decay in that way. And then here it is like having someone say, I remember being like, are you my real friend in my mind? Because it's like hearing somebody say that you still got to find your joy every day. And I was like, but how? Like legit, but how? And so, because honestly, and I'm leaving some things out because I know it's a long story. But because literally, and that's why I'm summing it up by saying, literally the things that you place in your life, you're like, this is what is real, whether it be your home, whether it be your career, maybe whether it is your love relationship or your friendships, whatever you're like really saying, this is like the real for real. For me, all those things are being taken away where they didn't look the same or were non-existent. And in my case, were non-existent, And so I remembered like just listening to my friend and trying to, I'm like, well, she's older and wise. So let me try to understand what she's saying. And then I started to realize it towards probably like the last week of my grandmother's existence here on earth. I started to really realize, like I just woke up one morning, right? And I was just like, but you are alive, And I was like, today, that's what I'm going to be grateful for. That I woke up in the bed of the woman I love, in shelter that's safe with food. So I'm going to focus on that today. And then I remember like driving to the hospital, and I'm driving to the hospital and I was like, I'm grateful I have a car to drive to the hospital. Because the other side of this story is because I'm budgeting my money, other bills had to be put on hold. And so at that point, my car was not paid off. It was not. And they were looking for it. And I said, look, you're just going to have to find my car. I got other things I'm worried about right now. Yeah, that's the truth. That's what happened. Grateful to say that car is paid off. But, and it was like close to being paid off. And I remember being like, man, I got 2 payments, 2 payments. Yeah, but they don't care. They was going to find me. They didn't, but they were going to. And I remember just being like, I'm grateful. I have gas money and a car to get there. And then another thing that started happening was then other relationships started to kind of come forward. And there were other people. It's interesting because some of these people I don't even talk to anymore now, but other friends just really stepped up and were there for me at that time, like, oh, you're back home in Maryland. I haven't seen you in so long. Oh, you're at the hospital with your grandmother. Well, you got to eat. And I'm like, well, what if she wakes up? And it's like, but you have to eat. So why don't we just go grab food and you can go back? And so I was grateful for those relationships. I even had one friend, he was just FaceTime me the whole time. And so I could be there and we're just FaceTiming. So I'm grateful for that friendship. Because he was out of town and he was like, you don't have to go through this alone. And that was a relatively new friend. So grateful for that. And I started to realize that all these other kind of opportunities started coming. And when I say opportunities, it was chances of hope. And it was when I started to refocus my mind on, well, yeah, these things are happening. And that's hard for me and horrible for me. But I can't negate these other wonderful things that are happening, because the great part that was also happening was by me being in this forced living situation with my mom at that time. It really started to help us mend and work on a better relationship as adults. It helped me to create a better communication with her, also create some boundaries that were necessary, because we were in a much better relationship now, thanks to my son. But that was the start. Even us working all together and not kind of like isolated, because that's how we operated. I don't know if you're familiar with any relationship that's dysfunctional. A lot of times you guys can coexist, but you operate in like your isolated mode. And so this was something that forced us to work in tandem together. And so once I kind of stopped kicking and screaming against the why and started focusing on what presently was happening, everything just started to, I swear, get better, because all of a sudden it was like days in communicating with my family were less heated and angry. Became less heated and angry. And then also it created space for other friends to come and create. Some are no longer here, reason, a season, or a lifetime, but some are still here and are stronger. And I never to this day forget who showed up emotionally. It's beautiful to me, like beautiful to me. And I remember my friend said, she said, death has the biggest chance for us to grow. It can heal the biggest wounds, or it can make big wounds. And she was like, but remember, there's hope in it. You can heal wounds. And I was like, what are you talking about? No way. But I get it, because I've seen other families be torn apart. I mean, please. I remember I was going to fist fight my sister. I was so mad at her. Sorry, if you're watching the podcast, you remember that day. Ooh, I was like, I've had enough. We gonna fight. And my mom was like, Danella, you didn't eat. I'll get you a veggie meal. She was rushing my sister out the house. We call her Pumpkin. Pumpkin, come. Let me get you some food. I was like, no, we're gonna fight. I know me, I seem ridiculous, but that's how angry, like that looming death can get you so angry, and you turn on one another. And I was grateful, because I remember that was like the first time in years, literally, and I told my mom this, but it was the first time in years that I was like, yo, that was a real mom thing to do. And on one end, to me, it sounds kind of sad, because I'm like, that was the best. But no, it literally was like, I was like, this is our best moment, because that's what a mom should do. I remember as she's rushing my sister out the house, because I was like, one, you identified the problem, which was Danella needs to be alone. But you also realized I needed to eat. Remember last podcast, I told you guys about the hangry? Yeah. So she's like, I'll just bring you something. And so they went out, got some food, brought it back. When they came back, we're back to normal, back to working together again. But through that entire period, I'll say the day came that my grandmother passed, and it was about a week. We're getting everything together. And at that period, my mom's like, I just want to move. We're moving in a week. I was like, what? Who does this? So yeah, that whole transition was super ridiculous, but we're like, okay, well, let's give all her belongings away to her friends. And so we're going through everything and sorting it all out in hyper speed, because a move is happening. And I remember just saying, okay, I just got to get to this move. Once I get my mom stable in a place, where she's good, then I can just leave and get a job and get back to my life, And so it ended up being that, man, it was like a couple weeks later. Like we had just moved into this place and I'm like, where's this job, God? Where's this job? I'm doing the work. We made it through my grandmother passing. Everybody survived. We didn't kill each other and we're actually better than we were. I've gotten rid of the shady friends. Like, I'm going down the checklist. Like, come on, God, I've done it in my mind. And I'm like, I'm doing the work. I'm meditating every day. Every day I'm waking up grateful. And then I got a call one day. And I remember this particular call was from Tigger. And he was like, hey, I'm doing this morning show in DC. I want to see if you're still interested in doing it. It's funny why he said still interested in doing it is because he offered it a year prior and then it just didn't happen. And so then it was happening now. And man, it was like just like that. And then I'm in this other situation. And so it was interesting because here I am now back on the air and not really having full time to completely mourn because, through that whole story, it was like I had to be strong for everybody, be strong for grandma every day, be strong for my immediate family and doctors and nurses, be grateful for them and all their hard work. At that time also I was on the board of this charity and just be available emotionally for everybody, but even not myself. So it was a long battle. But once we got through that year and I looked back, I literally was like, I totally get it. I get it. Is that freedom and that joy and that happiness is in your mind. Because one thing that is consistent in this life is that there is going to be strife and troubles. Guaranteed. That's the earth, right? Guaranteed. And so for me to experience like my true love, my unconditional love, to have her transition from earth and then be on earth looking around like, well, who's left for me? Who's left? Myself? Is this the right plan? And working through emotionally those thoughts, I start realizing that there's other things that are also at play. And the other things, like I kind of highlighted through the story, the other things were at play were I've been given the amazing opportunity to spend every day with my grandmother. There was one day that I missed in 6 weeks. One day. And that was for an opportunity of work that I had to take. But how many people can really say that young in their life and young in their careers? They can have all that time off to just be there for their relative to the very last actual breath. You don't get to say that. How often can you say like, okay, I'm not working and I'm running out of my savings. Now I have no savings and what's going to happen? And then you start accumulating your life and looking at your life and you're like, but this is all right. like I still had grace, like they say. I was still blessed with grace during that period. And I really feel that had I not started, I'll go back to friendships or relationships, losing all these said friendships. And and that moment is like, well, why? And then it's like, well, those aren't good friends for you. And I didn't realize that. And let me just say for the record, after my grandmother passed, it was like, maybe 3 months later, my dog died. I was like, come on. So it was a tough year. It was like, that's what I'm looking back like, yo, this was tough because everything is gone. Dang, my dog was like 13. That's a long time, right? That's a long time. Now, as years later, I can look back and here's why I want to share it with you. I'm sharing it with you to say that when I look back, I'm like, why do I have to come back to DC? I don't want to come back to DC. And the reason I stayed was I think I'm leaving after my grandmother passes. Then Tigger offers me a job. Then I'm doing a morning show. Then I'm no longer on that morning show. And then local news for NBC offers me a job. Then I'm working on NBC. Then I meet my husband. And then we get married. And then we have a child. And all of these transitions that are beautiful and created this new evolution in my life wasn't, if it were in my plan, would have happened. I would have never come back here and found them. Them is my, now immediate family. I don't know. There would have been no reason for that. And so I share this to say that I'm still not without struggle, but one thing I am clear on in all of my struggle, even if everything is falling down around me, because I've seen it fall down around me. That year, from 2009 to 2010, that year, I saw everything that was like your earthly stabilities, shifting and changing. And in it, I still saw that internally I had the power to still find joy, to still find happiness. And the way that I found that was first by acknowledging the joy, acknowledging the happiness, and then in action, doing things on the physical realm, actions to further have joy and happiness. So if my day started out with first being like, all right, if the least I can do is just be grateful that I open my eyes, and then it would be an increase to, okay, now my eyes are open. We have electricity. Nice. And then it would be like, and fresh air. Oh, all right. And then the actions I would start to put in was I started to meditate every day I woke up. And I remember we talked about boundaries with my mom. That was one of the boundaries I had to say, because my mom would wake up every morning and come in and talk like, yo, every morning before she goes to work. Danella, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I realized, I was like, I need to put this into words. I was like, I really need my mornings to start off tranquil. I'm still this way now. Like, I can't put out a bunch of big fires I got to focus, connect to my higher self and my higher power. Then we can conquer the world. Right. So that helps me. I know, even like as a mom, I'm like, oh, that's a great lesson. Glad I learned that back then. Mom, wake up, meditate, connect, so you can focus on your higher power. So yeah, that's an action. Another action that for me was necessary for me, I'm just going to share, was to be active. So I remember I would just take hikes if I can, or walks or runs. Of course, when my grandmother was in the hospital, it was difficult to put action things into action. But when she passed, then I made it more of an effort to be able to be more physical about it. When she was in the hospital, the joy could be finding joy in conversations, friends who call, or friends who just show up. I remember my one homegirl, Kathy, she's a great friend. She was like, listen, when someone passes, you just got to show up. And she just show up with food. I remember we weren't going to have, this was around Christmas time. We were like, we're just going to not do anything for Christmas. And she says, well, can I just come bring you breakfast? And I said, really? She was like, yeah, but I won't stay long because, my family, I got to do things with my family. I said, sure. And she brought Christmas, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So much food for my entire family that we ended up like we were like, okay, we should celebrate. Christmas was grandma's favorite holiday. So instead of like being depressed that she's like incapacitated in a hospital, let's enjoy each other together. Let's eat and remember her and things that she would do at Christmas time. And so, yeah. Even though, again, that was like a hard period in my life, it created an opportunity for me to see my friends, like how amazing their love is, and how then I can return that to other people. When it's my turn as a friend to help a friend that's transitioning, I now can come at a different place than I could had that experience not happened. So it further helped me realize that freedom is in your actual mind. It is. Because before I got to that joy, it was depression. And that can be debilitating. It can be just physically traps you, mentally traps you. And I know what that's like. And so I'm grateful to know how to move out of it. One is to get that mind working. And again, I'm not, I don't have anything physically, chemically happening. So I'm not negating anyone that has something physically, chemically happening where you may need medication. I'm not saying that you don't need it and you need to follow this. I'm just saying, here's what I did for other people that are trapped in their minds by their minds, because a lot of it is realizing that we have control over our happiness. And yeah, the world can be falling down around us. It can be. But how we respond to that is where our power is. So I could have just got depressed and got angry. And I did. I did get depressed. I did get angry. I just didn't stay in that. I didn't. I got angry and then said, okay, let me get this anger out. Now that this anger is out, let me put some love in. Let's put some laughter, some God in me to take up that space of emptiness that I had inside. And I just kept doing this series over and over until I looked around and was not in that environment anymore. It was like all of a sudden I wake up and, my new home, and it's better than any home I've ever had. And I'm at this point, I'm looking around, I'm with a job of fun. I go to work every day. It doesn't even feel like a job. It's so great. And literally, it was better than I had. So I'm grateful. And so I'm sharing this. What prompted me to share this with you is a couple of things that have happened, friends and family, where I've seen a friendship that is dealing with a possible passing of a loved one. And just, I've been talking to my friend about her in that situation. And, it's hard because she's just like, man, people are acting crazy. And I'm like, girl, I know it. They act crazy. But you got to be a beacon of light when you can. And when you can't be a beacon of light, excuse yourself. Take walks. You don't got to stay in that hospital all day. Go get something to eat. Call a friend. Recharge yourself. But try to focus on love. Don't fight your relatives on anger, because everybody's sad about the relative that is struggling to hold on to life. And so, I don't know, just talking to her about it, I was like, man, this is like a real struggle that us as humans, we go through. And a lot of times you might have a lesson and you never share it with anybody. You just keep it to yourself because it's like your personal life. And so I had something else planned for In Our World. And I thought about it and I was like, if I tell this story, I'm probably going to get all teary-eyed and I ain't trying to do that. And some people might be like, I don't care. And these are things I think about. But then I thought about, but there could be that one person that's going through this right now that this can be helpful for, because it was helpful to me when my friend passed along this message to me and my hardship. And though I could not understand, and she said, you'll understand it at the end of this, you'll fully get it. But what will get you to this end faster is really honing in on who you are and where your joy comes from, where your love comes from, right? Internal first. So, yeah, I'm sure you'll see as this podcast continues and shows to come that it's still a battle that happens, but it's one where once you learn the lesson, you can reflect back on it and call that lesson up to your life now when times are hard and insert it. So on one end, I had my friend going through the situation with her family, and then also a family member who is in a very difficult time. And I know wakes up every day and looks around and is kind of like, I don't like what my world looks like. Like, I don't like what this world looks like. It's not what I want it to look like. And feel anger and hurt and sadness. And so I'm recalling right now what got me through that. And I'm like, if my family member is going through this, then somebody else is too. And so my hope is said family member hears this story and is able, while right now things aren't looking the way it should in your mind, to have faith that all things are working for your good. All things are going to work out. But first, acknowledge what is working right now. Because even though it may seem like everything is falling down, I promise if you just start to look, you'll see at least one thing. And you're like, wait a minute. That's something greater than myself. That's something better than myself. And the more you do that, the more you'll see it's not one thing, it's two things, it's three things, four things. There's many things. And I could either let all the bad things that are happening control my mind, or I can work through it and acknowledge that, yeah, these things are bad, but these other things are great. And they are existing at the same time. So as I move through this, I'm just going to fill myself up with love and gratitude. Because if that's what I can control, I'm going to control that. Because that's way better than hurt, anger, and sadness. I mean, all the time, So yes, anger can be a helpful emotion. Once you express it, you can learn a lesson. That we'll do on another day. But today is going to be about you knowing that you control your mind, and freedom is in your mind. It is. Because they could take your body. Please look at the government. All this stuff we're dealing with the government. They can take it. They have it. But you have what's here. You have what's here. You control what's here. So, yeah, that's going to wrap up In Our World. If you stuck it out, thank you for sticking it out, being patient with me as I get through this story. I don't know. I just was like, we're going to try it. Because I'm a super preparer. I like to prepare. But for this, I decided not to, and just to speak from my heart. And yeah, I hope that it was helpful to you in some way. So, yeah, feel like now we're on a different level, right? Subscribers, maybe you don't feel that way. I feel that way. I definitely feel that way. Yeah, now we know each other a little bit better. So on the next episode, I'm going to ask you guys this, I think. We're running out of time today. It's been a long show. We've been through a lot. But from the Being Bobby Brown show, and we're watching it, and I like to talk when I watch. My husband doesn't like to talk. He likes to be quiet. He likes to say, shh. Yeah. So we'll explore that in another show. Are you a talker? Are you a shher? Because I think they insert pauses in shows and movies so you can talk. I think that makes it better. Now, I'm not doing this in the movie theater loudly. I do it quiet. We'll talk more about it in another show. I think it'll be next week's show because I was heated. I was like, well, now we're going to watch the show in silence. I'm just going to text my friend. Yeah. Yeah. So that about wraps up the show. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you would like to email, you know the address. You may not. It's Danella@DanellaNOW.com. On social media @DanellaNOW. Thank you so much for joining me again this week. Thank you for being on this journey with me. I truly appreciate you coming back each week and listening. We're a small crew, but we are a close-knit crew, and I appreciate you so much. So, I hope you have an incredible weekend, and I'll see you next week.